She drove that gleaming white SUV straight onto my hunting road, like she owned the whole mountain. The tires crushed my turkey decoy flat as a pancake before the dust even settled. Then the window rolled down slow, dramatic, and there she was, Valerie Stroud, president of the Maple Crest HOA, wearing sunglasses big enough to signal planes and a smirk that could curdle milk. "This land," she said, tapping her clipboard like it was a badge, "now falls under HOA jurisdiction." I just stood there, holding a half-dressed deer leg in my hands, blood on my sleeves, coffee in my system, and disbelief in my soul. My family carved that road through the redwoods, long before Valerie ever learned how to weaponize a homeowners association, and now she was claiming it like some sort of suburban conquistador in a leased SUV. I knew at that exact moment I had two choices: lose my freedom, or lose her tires, and trust me, I made the choice that was much more fun. Before we get into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, Karen, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss how this one ends. I've lived out in Redwood Bluff long enough to know which trees creak before the wind hits them, which creeks run muddy after a storm, and which deer will wander up the ridge first when the mornings turn cold. My cabin sits on the back end of a 40-acre patch of forest my great-grandfather carved out with nothing but an axe, a mule, and a stubborn streak we still haven't bred out of the family. Out here, land isn't just dirt. It's blood, memory, and a little bit of quiet carved away from the noise of the world. And running right through the center of my property is a narrow, winding hunting trail, a path our family has used for generations. It's where I learned to track deer tracks in mud before I learned to read. It's where my father taught me how to dress a buck without wasting a scrap. It's where my grandfather once claimed he saw the ghost of a Civil War scout. But that's a tale for another night and a stronger cup of bourbon. The point is, that trail is ours. It's heritage. You don't touch it unless you bleed the same name I do. That peaceful truth lasted right up until the day Maple Crest Estates grew like a tumor at the edge of the county line. A bunch of modern homes with perfect lawns, solar roof tiles, and mailboxes that probably cost more than my whole cabin. The kind of place where people walk little poodle mixes in coordinated sweaters and complain about leaves being too loud when they fall. I didn't mind them much at first. They stayed on their side. I stayed on mine. But peace never lasts long when someone like Valerie Stroud gets a taste of power. Valerie had moved in just 8 months earlier, but by week 2, she'd already rallied enough votes to become HOA president. By week 3, she was printing bylaws nobody remembered approving. And by week 4, she was knocking on people's doors with a clipboard, pointing out aesthetic violations, with the passion of a medieval inquisitor searching for sinners. My first encounter with her was harmless enough. She marched up my driveway like a mall cop on a mission, clutching a laser measurer. I watched from my porch as she pointed the little red dot at my bird bath, taking measurements at angles only a confused mathematician could appreciate. When I asked what exactly she was doing, she said, "Ensuring your structures comply with regional symmetry standards." Regional symmetry standards? I'd been alive 52 years and never heard a sentence so stupid. The second encounter was worse. I came home from a supply run to find a bright orange citation zip-tied to my door. According to Valerie, my split-rail fence posed an optical hazard to neighborhood joggers. Never mind that the nearest jogger was at least a mile away and too tired from running on their treadmill to ever wander this far. I ignored it. I ignored all of it, because sometimes the best way to deal with a mosquito is to let it buzz itself tired. But on the third encounter, when she drove her SUV over my hunting road, flattening my decoy, claiming my land fell under HOA jurisdiction, something in my spine snapped just loud enough for me to hear it. Standing there that morning, holding a bloody deer leg, watching her treat my family's history like a shortcut to a spa appointment, I realized something about people like Valerie. They don't stop, they don't reconsider, they escalate, and if you don't push back early, you'll wake up one day to find a sidewalk poured through your living room because some subsection of a bylaw said it was permitted. She didn't even live close enough to see my property from her house, but ever since she'd taken control of Maple Crest, she'd been obsessed with easements, utility corridors, and neighborhood cohesion. I swear, she said the word cohesion like it was a sacred text, The woman strutted around in branded HOA polos, like she was part of some paramilitary branch of lawn inspectors. That day, after she backed her SUV off my land, kicking up dust like she was peeling out of a racetrack, I just stood there for a while. The forest was quiet except for a woodpecker tapping away somewhere behind me. Even the deer seemed to pause, like nature itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. And the truth was, I didn't know. Not right away. I could call the sheriff, but the sheriff was my cousin, and dealing with HOA nonsense wasn't worth his coffee. I could confront her again, but she'd only twist my words into violations. People like her don't listen, they weaponize. No. If I was going to deal with Valerie, I had to do it in a way she'd understand, something that would speak directly to her arrogance, something that would make her think twice before setting a tire on my soil ever again. I went inside my workshop, a place filled with old tools, scrap metal, rusted nails, and whatever my grandfather couldn't throw away, because you never know when you might need it. That night, I poured 3 fingers of bourbon, stared at the pile of steel and leftover parts, and felt a slow smile forming. I wasn't proud of the idea that came next, but I also wasn't ashamed. A spike strip, not the kind meant to kill or maim, just the kind meant to send a message directly into the rubber sole of an overconfident SUV. I gathered rebar, bent nails, broken saw blades, and half a rake head, welded them together until they looked like a porcupine that had been through a bar fight. I even added a bit of angle on each spike, just enough to guarantee success. By the time I finished, the moon was high, the bourbon was warm in my blood, and my creation lay on the workbench like something forged in the fires of petty vengeance. I woke before dawn the next morning, grabbed a shovel, and walked the trail. I knew exactly where Valerie would drive. She had the predictable precision of a malfunctioning Roomba. I dug just deep enough to hide the device under a thin crust of soil, covered it with leaves, and stepped back to admire my work. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt calm, centered, balanced, even like a man who'd finally taken back control of a story someone else was trying to write for him. And right as I stood there, inhaling the pine-cold air of my land, I heard Hank Dobson's old Ford truck rolling up the gravel road. Hank, former Marine, full-time tinkerer, part-time philosopher. He got out, gave me one look, and said, "You're up to something." I shrugged. Hank grinned. "That's the thing about country folks, we don't need explanations to understand justice." Valerie had started something she couldn't finish, and I was just getting warmed up. The next morning broke with a cold stillness that only comes after a long night of plotting. You'd think a man would wake up feeling guilty after burying a metal contraption designed to turn 4 luxury tires into confetti. But no, my conscience was clearer than the mountain air. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, stepped onto my porch, and listened to the forest breathe. The pines rustled softly, the creek murmured in the distance, and a squirrel sat on a stump staring at me like it knew something was about to go down. Maybe it did. Animals out here have better instincts than most folks in Maple Crest Estates. I settled into my old rocking chair, refusing to rush. Timing was everything. Valerie was punctual to a fault, a woman who scheduled her yoga classes down to the millisecond. Predictability makes revenge easy. So I waited, sipping my coffee, savoring each swallow like it was the overture of a grand performance. At exactly 9:43 a.m., a time I would later regard as sacred, her white Audi Q7 came roaring down the gravel road, opera music blasting loud enough to wake every deer within a mile radius. I swear she chose that music just to prove something, though I'm still not sure what. Maybe she wanted the trees to understand they were beneath her. She turned onto my trail as if repeating a personal ritual, wheels crunching over the same sacred soil she had desecrated the day before. And then, right on cue, it happened. The first tire hit the spike strip with a sound like a bear stepping on a balloon. A thunderous pop echoed through the forest, followed by an angry hiss. The SUV lurched sideways. The second tire met its fate an instant later. Valerie slammed the brakes, but momentum carried her forward just far enough for the remaining 2 tires to find their own doom. 4 pops, 4 hisses, and then silence. A silence so perfect, so deeply satisfying, I almost felt bad breaking it by taking another sip of coffee. The Audi sagged like a wounded animal. Valerie stumbled out of the driver's seat, arms flailing, sunglasses crooked. She stared at her SUV with the expression of someone witnessing a Shakespearean tragedy unfold before their eyes. She knelt beside the shredded rubber, touched one of the jagged holes, and recoiled like the tire had personally betrayed her. From my position behind a garden gnome, yes, I was hiding behind a garden gnome. Don't judge. I watched her spin in a slow circle, scanning the trees for answers. Maybe she expected a mountain lion with bolt cutters. Maybe she thought Redwood Bluff had sentient porcupines. Whatever story she told herself, she wasn't ready to consider the obvious one, that someone she had underestimated was finally pushing back. Eventually, she pulled out her phone and started making calls. I couldn't hear her words, but her posture said everything: rigid, offended, trembling with disbelief. After a few minutes, she stomped back into the SUV, slammed the door, then immediately remembered her tires were flatter than the earth. She probably believes revolves around HOA regulations. She got out again, defeated. For the next hour, she paced. She attempted to take photos but kept framing them poorly. She scribbled furious notes on her clipboard. At one point, she even tried to wave down a passerby, forgetting that nobody passes through Redwood Bluff unless they're lost, a hermit, or coming to borrow one of Hank's potato cannons. Eventually, a tow truck arrived. The driver examined the tires, glanced at the trail, then gave her a look that clearly meant, "Lady, what the hell did you run over? A medieval fortress?" She talked his ear off while he loaded the Audi onto the flatbed. I can only assume she gave him a monologue about safety, wildlife threats, and potential terrorism. Once the tow truck left, the forest exhaled again. Peace settled. My trail, my family's trail, lay quiet and undisturbed. I walked out from behind the gnome, dusted myself off, and admired the deep grooves carved into the dirt where the spike strip had done its holy work. I dug up what was left of the contraption, hauled it back to the shed, and wiped the sweat from my brow. Justice has a weight to it. And that morning, it felt heavy and righteous in equal measure. By the time afternoon rolled around, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. Maple Crest residents love a good scandal, preferably one that doesn't involve their own lawns. I overheard two hikers talking near the boundary line. One claimed Valerie had tried to drive through a swamp. Another insisted there were feral hogs with titanium tusks migrating through the area. Someone else later told me they heard it was a rogue ATV gang. I didn't deny any of it. Rumors, when left alone, grow into beautiful, wild flowers of confusion. That evening, as I walked past Hank's place, he stepped onto his porch with the biggest grin I'd seen on him in years. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. He simply handed me a cold six-pack of beer with the solemnity of a soldier awarding a medal. I nodded. He nodded. Two men, united by unspoken understanding that sometimes life hands you trouble, and sometimes life hands you a perfectly timed pop of rubber, followed by victory. But trouble wasn't finished with me. At sundown, I found a paper notice duct taped to my mailbox so aggressively that it nearly peeled the paint off. The message was typed in the font, HOA President's Love, because it looks authoritative, even though it's basically just angry Arial. Potential security breach reported in the area. Surveillance enhancements forthcoming. Residents are advised to cooperate with all HOA inspections. The last line was underlined twice. Cooperate. As if I were one of her employees, I crumpled the paper in my fist and let it fall to the ground. The wind carried it into the ditch, exactly where it belonged. I knew enough about people like Valerie to recognize her mindset. She wasn't scared, she was offended, embarrassed, and people like her don't reflect on their actions, they retaliate. Sure enough, the retaliation came quickly. The next morning, as I stepped outside to chop wood, I noticed something new glinting on a pine tree across the road. At first, I thought it was a bird feeder, but no, the blinking red light gave it away. She'd mounted a security camera atop a nailed board, angled straight at my cabin, and beneath it, zip-tied like a badge of honor, was a laminated sign reading, "Property monitored for community safety." Community safety, my ass. I walked directly up to the camera, stared into it for 10 solid seconds, then gave it the kind of middle finger that carried generational weight. I followed it with a cheerful wave, just to make sure the message landed. 2 hours later, an email arrived from the HOA with the subject line, "Report of disturbing gestures." If she wanted a war, she was going to get one, but not the kind she was prepared for. That night, under the dim glow of my workshop lights, I began crafting my next move. Something subtle, something poetic, something guaranteed to short-circuit her little surveillance crusade. And that is how I ended up building a scarecrow, approximately the size of a small elk, wearing my old army jacket, holding a full-length mirror angled perfectly at her security camera. Every sunrise for the next week, sunlight bounced off that mirror and blasted straight into the lens like a divine laser from the heavens. 3 days later, the camera vanished. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the quiet vanishing of a failed mission. But Valerie didn't retreat. She escalated again. She filed a complaint saying my mailbox was too rural in aesthetic. That was when I realized this wasn't just tit for tat anymore. This was becoming a war of endurance, a test of who would blink first, and I had no intention of blinking. It didn't take long before Valerie found new ways to escalate. People like her don't regroup or rethink, they reload. By the next morning, I stepped out onto my porch and spotted not one, but 2 more cameras mounted on different trees, each angled like some kind of woodland periscope aimed directly at my front door. One of them was duct-taped so aggressively that the poor pine tree looked like it was being held hostage. At first, I just stared, hands on my hips, coffee steaming. I tried to imagine the internal monologue of a woman who believed mounting surveillance equipment on private land was normal behavior. Maybe she told herself she was protecting the neighborhood. Maybe she told herself the HOA bylaws gave her divine authority. Or maybe she was just so deep into her own ego that reason had long since packed up and moved to a quieter zip code. Either way, I wasn't about to let it slide. Instead of marching down to her McMansion and getting arrested for yelling, "Are you out of your damn mind?" I opted for creativity. Again, creativity had served me well so far. So before breakfast, I took apart the elk-sized scarecrow, replaced the mirror with a shinier one, and installed it on a rotating base powered by an old set of garden windmills I'd had lying around since 2009. Every time the breeze picked up, the scarecrow spun and sent sunbeams scattering like a disco party, designed specifically to blind HOA cameras. By noon, 2 of her cameras were flickering like dying fireflies. By sunset, only the duct-taped one survived, and even that one looked deeply confused. If cameras can look confused, the following morning, not a single camera remained. No stump holes, no zip ties, no apology letter, just a passive-aggressive silence in the trees. The kind of silence that says, "This isn't over," in a tone that sounds like someone clutching a half-empty glass of rosé at a neighborhood mixer. Valerie struck back shortly after in the way she knew best. Citations, lots of them. A bright yellow envelope appeared on my porch. Mailbox non-compliance. According to her, my mailbox, built by my late father out of cedar and memories, was a hazard to neighborhood visual harmony. Visual harmony. That one nearly sent me into an early grave from laughing. Another envelope arrived the next day. Unapproved decorative element. The hammock I'd hung between 2 oaks, a simple, sturdy piece of canvas, was apparently an eyesore inconsistent with Maple Crest's visual goals. So, naturally, I spray-painted it neon orange. The following morning, a 3rd citation arrived. Illegal outdoor seating. I didn't even know outdoor seating could be illegal, but Valerie had printed a whole paragraph about chairs needing to be neutral-toned and compliant with HOA aesthetic codes. So I built a bench out of antlers, actual antlers, glued them together like a frontier art installation. It sent Valerie into orbit. Within days, the neighborhood split into factions. Most folks in Maple Crest were neutral observers, peeking from behind their glass panel doors like they were watching a nature documentary about territorial elk. But a few brave souls chose sides. Hank Dobson, naturally, was on my side. The man once launched a potato cannon at a drone that buzzed too close to his chicken coop. Our alliance was destiny. Then there was Tony and Mara, from 3 houses down, young couple. He brewed his own beer. She raised backyard chickens disguised as emotional support birds to avoid HOA restrictions. They were already rebels. They took to my cause immediately. Mara even crocheted a small banner that read, "Free the Trail," and hung it on their porch. On the opposite side stood Valerie's loyalists, led by a woman named Rebecca Thorne. Rebecca wore yoga pants like a tactical uniform and owned a golden doodle with more outfits than a Broadway costume closet. She started a group chat called Operation Neighborhood Order, which everyone else quietly referred to as Cult Chat. They walked around with clipboards, taking photos of leaves that fell in non-approved patterns, measuring grass height, and glaring at any property not painted eggshell white. This nonsense continued until the night the forest went quiet. Too quiet. I was on my back property line, checking trail cameras, actual cameras, not HOA spyware, when I noticed one had gone offline. It wasn't out of batteries. It wasn't damaged by weather. It was simply gone from the grid. That wasn't normal. My equipment doesn't just quit. Concerned? I grabbed a flashlight and headed deeper into the woods, guided by instinct and a strange bluish glow in the distance. As I pushed through the underbrush, the glow grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. At first, I thought maybe some teenagers had set up an illegal campsite. Maybe a hunter had brought a generator. But when I reached the clearing, what I found wasn't camping gear. It was a shack, a makeshift shack built from mismatched plywood and corrugated metal, propped on cinder blocks like someone had tried to recreate a disaster relief shelter from memory. Behind it hummed a gas generator. The smell of exhaust filled the clearing. Wires ran from the generator into the shack through a cracked open window, and on the roof stood a small satellite dish paired with a long-range signal booster, the kind I'd only seen at hunting trade shows in the "for law enforcement use" aisle. Beside the shack sat a second SUV, not her Audi. A black, scratched-up Chevy Tahoe with Maple Crest tags still stuck to the windshield. The entire scene looked like a sci-fi bunker built by someone with more ambition than sense. My first thought was, well, that's illegal. My second was, so that's why she keeps talking about easements and utility corridors. My third was, I need reinforcements. So I went to the only person in the neighborhood more dangerous than Hank with a potato cannon, Mrs. Agatha Doran. Most folks knew Agatha as the sweet 70-year-old widow who baked muffins so good they made grown men cry. But what they didn't know, what only a few of us longtime residents understood, was that Agatha had worked nearly 3 decades in signals intelligence for the NSA during the Cold War. She once corrected a History Channel documentary mid-sentence. She played bridge like she was running a covert op. She could identify encrypted radio chatter the way other people identify bird calls. So I knocked on her door just after sundown. When she opened it, she was wearing slippers, holding a cup of chamomile tea, and had an expression that said she already knew I had something interesting to tell her. I explained what I'd found: the shack, the generator, the satellite dish, the signal booster, the spare SUV. She didn't blink. She didn't gasp. She didn't even sip her tea. She simply said, "About time someone noticed." That sentence hit me like a slap made of pure intrigue. Agatha already knew. She'd been watching Valerie longer than any of us. Apparently, Valerie had tried to fine her once for non-native flora inconsistency in her rose garden. Instead of complying, Agatha rerouted Valerie's router traffic and intercepted 2 of her HOA emails, discovering that Valerie was using a VPN tied to an offshore server. Valerie wasn't just an HOA tyrant. She was running some kind of unregistered communications setup out of a shack in the woods. When Agatha finished explaining her findings, she set her teacup down gently and said, "We're going to need walkie-talkies." That's when I knew things were about to get serious. Agatha disappeared into her hallway and returned carrying a metal tin that looked like it once held homemade cookies. When she popped it open, there weren't any treats inside, just 2 military-grade walkie-talkies, a handful of strange antenna attachments, and 1 laminated card with radio codes printed in tiny, efficient columns. "Picked these up in '89, she said casually, as if she were talking about a set of knitting needles. "Still work? Never know when the world might need a little clarity." When Agatha said clarity, I had a feeling she meant something closer to surveillance or possibly controlled chaos. We tested the walkie-talkies right there in her living room. They crackled to life with a satisfying old-school static. She adjusted one of the knobs with a surprising amount of muscle for a 70-year-old, then nodded. "Channel 6, she said. "Encrypted enough for our purposes." "Our purposes," I repeated. She raised an eyebrow. "Ethan, dear, you didn't come to me about a shack full of illegal communications hardware because you wanted a second opinion on landscaping. Fair?" I told her everything I'd seen: the generator, the satellite dish, the booster tower, the cables that looked military grade, and the spare SUV. She listened, fingers steepled. Not a muscle moving, except when she blinked, or when I mentioned the booster tower, at which point she muttered, "Amateur installation, dangerous." That didn't comfort me. When I finished, she stood, grabbed a knitted cardigan off the back of a chair, and said, "We'll take your truck. Mine's too recognizable." "Recognizable?" I asked. "Valerie's been watching me for weeks," she replied, picking up her tea again. "She doesn't know what I know, but she knows I know something. People like her can smell suspicion like raccoons smell trash. So, off we went, two unlikely operatives trudging across the forest line in the fading dusk. My truck rumbled quietly along the old fire road behind my property, headlights off. Agatha, navigating from memory like she had internal GPS, for questionable structures in the woods. When we reached the trail leading toward the shack, she held up a hand, signaling me to kill the engine. I did. The forest swallowed the sound. Agatha stepped out, first moved like a woman half her age, surprisingly light-footed. She held her walkie like a sidearm. I followed, feeling both out of my depth and slightly terrified that my neighbor was this competent at espionage. We approached the clearing with caution. The faint glow from the shack still pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The generator hummed steadily. A mechanical breath in the night. Agatha crouched behind a fallen log, peering through a pair of compact binoculars. "You said she's been transporting cases from a truck stop," she whispered. "Yep. Metal, locked, looked suspicious as hell." She sighed, lowering the binoculars. "Then whatever she's transmitting probably isn't legal. Like HOA newsletter, illegal, or federal agent, illegal," I whispered back. She adjusted her glasses. "You don't need binoculars to see which one." We watched in silence for a few minutes, listening. No movement, no headlights, no Valerie. Then Agatha tapped her walkie twice, a coded signal telling me to follow. We moved around the perimeter carefully, avoiding leaves that might crunch, avoiding the line of sight from the shack's grimy window, and stepping precisely where she pointed like a grandmother teaching her grandson ballet. But with espionage stakes, she motioned for me to kneel. I did. She reached down and plucked a tiny device from the dirt, a magnetic sensor the size of a coin. "She's installed motion triggers," Agatha whispered, "likely connected to whatever improvised system she's running in there. Amateur. Again, sloppy." "How do you know all this?" I asked. She glanced at me, expression unchanging. I had a life before hydrangeas. We continued circling the shack until she found an angle she liked. She handed me her binoculars and gestured for me to observe. Inside, through the narrow crack of a crooked window, I could see cables everywhere, thick ones, thin ones, tangled ones, all running to a set of blinking consoles, cheap monitors stacked on milk crates, a surge protector taped to a bookshelf, and a file box labeled Maple Crest Authorized Personnel Only, which felt like the least comforting label I'd ever seen. And the kicker, the part that pushed this whole thing from HOA nonsense into "this is how Netflix documentaries begin," was a locked metal case sitting in the corner. The same kind she'd transferred at the truck stop. Agatha watched me watching the shack. "You understand now?" "Yes. I understand that our HOA president is running a pirate communications hub out of a building held together with prayer." She nodded once. "Precisely." We withdrew back to my truck and climbed in. Agatha took out a small notebook that looked older than both of us and scribbled notes so fast her pen practically smoked. "Tomorrow," she said, "we gather evidence." "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "The kind that survives federal scrutiny," she answered calmly. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because the puzzle pieces were finally fitting together. Valerie's obsession with surveillance, her insistence on new easements, her sudden appearance in the woods, the way she spoke into that ridiculous Bluetooth headset, even when no one was on the line. She wasn't just a tyrannical HOA president, she was hiding something bigger than mailboxes and lawn decor. The next morning, Agatha arrived at my cabin with a satchel full of gadgets that looked like they were smuggled out of a spy museum. She handed me a tiny clip-on camera. "Wear this on your jacket," she said. "Get close-range shots of the equipment. What if Valerie shows up?" "She won't. She's on a schedule. Wednesday mornings, she attends a Pilates class called Strength Through Serenity. She's been attending for 6 weeks and hasn't missed one." "How do you know that?" She gave me a flat look. "Ethan, please." "Right. Dumb question." We hiked back toward the shack around mid-morning. On the way, Agatha briefed me like she was prepping me for a classified op. "Do not touch anything metal," she said. "Some of those devices may be hot-wired improperly. If the generator has been overloaded, the surge could fry your camera or your eyebrows. Good to know. Move slowly. Document all cables. Pay attention to serial numbers if visible. And when we're done, we retrieve data from her cameras." "Wait. Her cameras?" "Yes," she said with a small smile. "She's been recording herself. People like Valerie always do. They love an audience." We reached the clearing. The shack sat silent, except for the steady rattle of the generator. I approached cautiously while Agatha monitored the perimeter. Inside, I activated the clip-on camera and began documenting close-up shots of the consoles, the signal booster, the makeshift router, the satellite dish controller, the metal case, the Maple Crest file box. Then something strange, an invoice taped to the wall. It listed components purchased from an overseas vendor known for selling gray market encryption hardware. The buyer name, V. Stroud. I leaned closer, squinting. On the bottom was a handwritten note. Shipment #3, arrives Friday. Clear trail access required. Trail access. My trail. That's why she wanted it. I backed out. Pulse racing. Agatha met me halfway. Got what you need. More than I wanted. We returned to my cabin for Phase 2, extracting the data from Valerie's own cameras. Agatha set up her laptop like a general preparing for battle. Within minutes, she'd breached Valerie's feed, muttering, "Honestly, this is barely encrypted. I taught interns who could do better blindfolded." She downloaded timestamps, activity logs, and even one video clip that showed Valerie hauling a suspicious box into the shack at 2:14 a.m. Once everything was compiled, Agatha sat back, satisfied. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "is how we end her." But Valerie wasn't slowing down. That afternoon, Maple Crest sent a mass email announcing a special emergency HOA meeting to vote on a new amendment granting the HOA authority over adjacent natural routes essential for community safety. She was trying to officially claim my trail. Agatha and I exchanged a look. The battlefield had shifted from the woods to the community center, and we were ready. The announcement of that emergency HOA meeting spread through Maple Crest faster than gossip at a church potluck. Within hours, residents were whispering about critical safety concerns and necessary new regulations, all courtesy of an email crafted by Valerie herself, complete with bolded words, italicized threats, and enough bureaucratic jargon to tranquilize a lawyer. To anyone else, it might have looked like routine HOA business, but to me, and to Agatha, it was the opening move of something far more calculated. The amendment she proposed was simple on paper. The HOA shall assume full authority over any natural routes adjacent to or connected with Maple Crest Estates, should such routes be deemed vital to community safety and utility access. It was a masterful piece of manipulative nonsense. It sounded official enough to fool the average homeowner, but in practice, it meant she wanted legal power over my land, my hunting road, the very trail her SUV had no business touching in the first place. "This is her power grab," I muttered, pacing across my cabin living room. Agatha sat calmly at my table, sipping black coffee while reviewing the evidence we'd collected. "She's accelerating her plan. The shack suggests a timeline. Perhaps the third shipment arrives soon. You think whatever she's transmitting needs access to my trail. Or perhaps the trail simply provides plausible deniability," she replied, flipping through her notes. "A remote area where suspicious equipment can be hidden under the guise of community infrastructure. People like her use legitimacy as camouflage." I sat down across from her. "So, how do we stop her?" Agatha smiled, the kind of smile that made me wonder how many international incidents she had personally contributed to in her glory days. "We don't stop her. We expose her. Publicly. Visibly. Irrefutably." She tapped the stack of evidence, screenshots of illegal equipment, video footage, intercepted HOA emails, satellite dish invoices, and our high-resolution photos of the shack. "We present this at the meeting?" I blinked. "That's insane." "Yes," she replied cheerfully. "Which is precisely why it will work." That was how we found ourselves planning what could only be described as a tactical presentation of epic proportions. Agatha brought her laptop, a tiny projector she claimed was procured from an office in Berlin, and a bag of lemon bars because, as she put it, if you're going to destroy a woman socially, ethically, and legally, you might as well make sure the crowd is well fed. We rehearsed the plan 3 times. I'd step forward during the vote, request permission to address the board, and once I had the floor, Agatha would hit the projector. Not subtle, not polite, but devastating. On the day of the meeting, I hitched Donnie's trailer to my truck and loaded it with the portable generator and screen. When I arrived at the Maple Crest Community Center, homeowners were already gathering in a messy crowd, half anxious, half annoyed, all oblivious. The center itself was a glass-fronted building Maple Crest had spent way too much money on. Inside, rows of metal folding chairs faced a podium decorated with a sad-looking potted fern. Valerie stood behind it, wearing a blazer and an expression of self-satisfaction so thick you could butter toast with it. She spotted me immediately. Her lips pursed into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Mercer," she said loudly, projecting her voice so everyone could hear. "Glad you decided to join us despite recent tensions." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, tipping my hat. She narrowed her eyes, sensing something she couldn't quite identify, like a cat, realizing the bird it's chasing might actually be a bobcat wearing feathers as a trick. The room filled quickly, Rebecca and her yoga pants brigade, Tony and Mara sitting defiantly in the second row, Hank leaning against the wall in his marine jacket like he was ready to reenact the Battle of Fallujah. Even a few newcomers I'd never seen before slipped in, eager to witness whatever storm was brewing. Valerie cleared her throat into the microphone. "Thank you all for attending this urgent meeting. Today, we'll discuss Amendment 12F, the reclassification of adjacent natural routes under HOA authority for safety and maintenance purposes." She launched into a speech full of buzzwords: community cohesion, structural necessity, imminent risk mitigation, the kind of speech that sounded serious until you realized it meant precisely nothing. Then she took a breath and said, "If there are no objections, I'd like to proceed directly to a vote." That was my cue. I stood. "I have an objection." Heads turned. Some gasped. Rebecca clutched her dog like it was a rosary. Valerie's smile was a taut rubber band ready to snap. "Yes, Mr. Mercer. I believe the community deserves to see what this amendment is really about." Her face paled. "This meeting is not the time." "Actually," I interrupted, "it's the perfect time." At that exact moment, Agatha, sweet, elderly, cardigan-wearing Agatha, plugged her laptop into the portable projector. The lights dimmed, the screen lit up with the first image, Valerie's secret shack in the woods, illuminated in high-resolution glory. A murmur swept the room. Valerie froze, her jaw slack. "This," I said, walking toward the screen, "is a structure built illegally on private land, using Maple Crest resources, and operating as an unauthorized communications hub." The next slide showed the satellite dish. Gasps. The next, the invoice connecting Valerie to encrypted hardware suppliers overseas. Someone shouted, "What the hell?" Then came the video clip Agatha extracted from Valerie's own cameras. Valerie dragging a locked case into the shack at 2 a.m, muttering to herself like a villain in a cheap thriller. The crowd erupted. "Is that her? What's she doing out there? My God, my kids play near those woods." Valerie attempted to speak. This is wildly misinterpreted." But the next slide silenced her completely. A signal map showing the boosted transmission bouncing to an offshore server flagged by federal authorities. You could hear a pin drop on carpet. Rebecca stood up, yoga pants trembling. "Valerie, are you running a pirate tech operation out of our neighborhood?" Valerie sputtered. "It's a prototype, a hobby, a misunderstood project meant to enhance." No one bought it. Then, as if the universe wanted dramatic timing, a black SUV screeched to a stop outside the community center. 2 men stepped out wearing suits so crisp you could shave with them. They entered the room, flashed badges, and faced Valerie. "Mrs. Valerie Stroud," one said, "we need to speak with you regarding unauthorized signal distribution, failure to report international equipment imports, and potential violations of federal communication law." The room exploded with chaos. People shouted, someone fainted. Tony filmed on his phone like it was the Super Bowl. Valerie didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply stared at me. Rage, humiliation, shock fused into one expression before being escorted out of the building. The meeting dissolved into pandemonium. Some homeowners demanded all her citations be voided. Others wanted Maple Crest disbanded entirely. Hank yelled, "I knew she was up to something," loud enough to rattle the windows. But through all the noise, Agatha and I exchanged a small nod. The plan worked, the truth won, and my trail was safe. When the agents marched Valerie out of the community center, the room didn't just loosen, it detonated. Homeowners surged out of their chairs, each one talking louder than the last, voices climbing over one another like panicked birds scattering from a shaken tree. A few were furious that they'd been dragged into her mess. Others were terrified at what they'd almost been part of. Some were simply thrilled to have something dramatic to post on their neighborhood group chat. Rebecca, self-appointed lieutenant of Valerie's cleanliness crusade, collapsed into a folding chair, as though the revelation had physically drained her. Her golden doodle barked twice, offended by the emotional energy. Tony, with his phone still recording, said, "Guys, this is going straight on my page. This is premium HOA drama." Mara smacked his arm. "Stop posting everything, Tony. This is serious." Tony ignored her completely. Hank pushed his way through the crowd toward me, grinning like a man who had just gotten confirmation of every conspiracy theory he'd ever believed. "I knew she was running something weird," he shouted. "Told you, told everybody. But did they listen?" "No." "Well," I said, "they're listening now." We didn't have much time to enjoy the victory, though, because soon the remaining HOA board members, 3 confused, frightened people who clearly had no idea what Valerie had been doing, shakily approached the podium. A man named Peter, whose primary personality trait was fear of conflict, cleared his throat. Due to today's developments, Maple Crest HOA will temporarily suspend all operations." The room erupted again. Someone shouted, "Suspend? No, shut it down." Another yelled, "My God, I let her measure my hedges." Rebecca stood up, trembling. "We must maintain order," someone else shot back. "Order? From you?" her dog woofed, as though echoing the sentiment. Agatha, calm in the middle of the storm, closed her laptop and watched everything with the serene amusement of someone who had survived much worse. Cold War espionage, for example. I leaned toward her. "So, what now?" She patted my hand. "Now, dear, we let natural consequences do what they do best." Federal consequences, apparently, moved even faster. By the end of the week, Valerie's shack had been cordoned off with bright yellow tape. Men in hazmat suits, actual hazmat suits, hauled out the equipment piece by piece. The satellite booster was wrapped like a dangerous animal. The generator was drained, tagged, and removed. The plywood shack itself was taken apart and loaded onto a flatbed truck. As for Valerie's house, well, a large for sale sign appeared in her yard barely 72 hours after her arrest. Rumor said the federal charges were enough to bankrupt her outright. Another rumor said she'd taken a plea deal. Yet another rumor, my personal favorite, claimed she'd tried to blame rogue HOA members for her crimes. Considering Valerie, that one might not be too far from the truth. Meanwhile, Maple Crest homeowners were in a state of suspended confusion. Without a functioning HOA, there were no more surprise fines, no more unsanctioned cameras, no more late-night patrols with clipboards. Some celebrated, some panicked. A few wandered the streets like lost children in a supermarket, unsure what to do without someone telling them when to trim their bushes. During this transition period, the county called an emergency meeting to address the chaos. They asked for volunteers to serve on a temporary oversight committee until Maple Crest could elect a new, sane board. Several neighbors approached me after the meeting. "Ethan, you should join. You're reasonable. You have common sense." "Yeah," another said. "You're the only one who stood up to her." A third added, "You actually understand what private property means." I appreciated the compliments, really, but the idea of spending my days arguing about fence heights and mailbox uniformity made me want to walk straight into the woods and never come back. So I declined. "I'd rather spend my time reinforcing my hammock," I said, "and maybe drinking beer with Hank." That satisfied them. Most people can't argue with a man who knows his priorities. The county eventually appointed a small group of non-deranged individuals to run Maple Crest temporarily. They had 3 main goals: clean up the disaster Valerie left, void every bogus citation she'd issued, rebuild trust. They accomplished all 3 surprisingly quickly. One afternoon, I received an email, this one actually polite, confirming that all fines and warnings tied to my property had been removed from the HOA system. My mailbox, my hammock, my scarecrow, even the antler bench, all officially safe and legal. I printed the email just to admire it. But the biggest victory came when the county reviewed land documentation and made a ruling that nearly brought tears to my eyes. My hunting trail, the same trail Valerie tried to claim, the one she drove over, the one she wanted to pave, was officially declared a protected rural pathway, permanently exempt from HOA oversight. I framed the letter and hung it in my bathroom so I could enjoy it every morning. Life in Redwood Bluff settled back into its natural rhythm, as if the forest itself sighed in relief. Birds returned to their usual perches. Deer resumed wandering near my clearing. Squirrels stopped staring at me like I was planning the next explosive event. One early morning, as I walked the trail with a thermos of coffee, I spotted a young deer standing at the exact place where Valerie's tires had burst. It stared at me, motionless, then flicked its tail and disappeared into the trees. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was the bourbon I'd had the night before. Or maybe the forest had simply acknowledged the restoration of proper order. As for Agatha, she became something of a local legend. People visited her porch with baked goods, gardening questions, conspiracy theories, and timid curiosity about her past. She never confirmed or denied anything. She just smiled into her teacup with that knowing look she wore so effortlessly. Every Sunday morning, she'd stop by my cabin with a fresh batch of lemon bars. We'd sit on the porch, share stories, and sometimes play cards while mocking Valerie's abandoned bird feeder, which squirrels had claimed as their new buffet. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at my door. A book, self-published, glossy cover, titled, "I Tried to Make Things Better, My HOA Journey." On the cover was a photo of Valerie holding a clipboard like it was a sword. I laughed so hard I almost choked. I bought 10 more copies, handed them out to neighbors, and used the rest as kindling at our next community bonfire. As the pages curled into ash, I felt something warm, satisfaction. Not the fire rise in my chest. I didn't beat her because I was stronger, richer, or had more people on my side. I beat her because I refused to bow, because I fought with patience, grit, creativity, and just enough crazy to match her ambition, and because I had friends, the beer-bringing Marine, the chicken-raising rebels, the Cold War mastermind in a cardigan who stood with me when it mattered. When all was said and done, the trail remained mine, the land remained free, and the HOA learned a lesson they'd never forget. You can write bylaws, you can hand out fines, you can even try to bulldoze tradition, but you cannot outmaneuver a man who knows his land like his own heartbeat, a man with a welder, a stubborn streak, and neighbors who know how to fight fire with lemon bars. The days after Valerie's arrest felt strangely quiet, almost like the forest itself was pausing to make sure she was truly gone before letting life return to normal. For the first time in nearly a year, I could walk out onto my porch without wondering whether a hidden camera was recording how many seconds I chewed my breakfast. I didn't have to check my mailbox for citations. I didn't have to brace myself for the sound of her SUV barreling down a road she had no business touching. But even with peace returning, the cleanup, political, legal, and emotional, was far from over. Maple Crest had gone from a bustling suburban haven to a neighborhood dealing with a miniature political collapse, an accidental brush with federal crime, and the collective trauma of realizing they'd elected a tyrant in yoga pants. A few days after the bonfire, where Valerie's book met its fiery end, the temporary county-appointed committee invited several residents, including me, to a discussion about redefining the HOA. I went, not because I wanted to be involved, but because I didn't trust anyone else to keep an eye on things long enough to prevent the next Valerie Stroud from crawling out of the woodwork. Inside the community center, the atmosphere was somber but hopeful. Chairs were arranged in a circle, an attempt at fostering equality. Or maybe someone just thought it would be cozy. The acting chairperson, a mild-mannered accountant named Leonard, welcomed everyone with a voice so soft it sounded like an apology. "Our goal," he began, "is to rebuild Maple Crest into a healthier community, one that values transparency, fairness, and, mutual respect." Translation, Hank muttered behind me, "Less crazy," Leonard continued. "We must also address the legal consequences of Mrs. Stroud's actions and ensure that nothing similar can ever happen again." People nodded, murmuring in agreement, but then Leonard said something that made my eyebrows shoot up. "We'd like to consider creating a partnership between Maple Crest and adjacent landowners, including you, Mr. Mercer." Several heads turned toward me. I froze. Leonard smiled timidly. "You possess a unique, how should I say, perspective. We think your insight could help shape a more balanced set of community guidelines." I cleared my throat. "Let me stop you right there, Leonard. I appreciate the offer, truly, but I've spent the last several months dodging illegal surveillance, dismantling secret spy shacks, and watching my hunting trail get treated like a public driveway. I'm not interested in joining any committee." A few people chuckled. Leonard looked deflated but nodded respectfully. "I understand." Still, we'd appreciate any advice you can provide. Advice that I could do. So, I offered the only 3 guidelines I believed were essential. First, I said, raising a finger, no more surveillance cameras pointed at private land ever. If someone tries it, I'll personally escort them and their camera back out of the neighborhood. Several people laughed, though I wasn't joking. Second, HOA vehicles, golf carts, SUVs, whatever do not cross property lines without explicit permission. More nods. And third, I paused, glancing around the circle. The hunting trail stays off limits, permanently. No more votes, no more loopholes. That path belongs to my family history, not Maple Crest policy. Hank slapped the back of my chair approvingly. Mara whispered, "Amen." Leonard scribbled everything down like he was taking notes for a constitutional amendment. Within a week, the committee drafted new rules based on those principles. They even added a clause designating the trail a historically significant rural route, ensuring no future HOA president could ever use it as a pawn again. When the neighborhood voted on the new rules, the results were unanimous, something Maple Crest had never achieved before. Not even during their argument 2 years ago about whether Christmas lights could be multicolored. With the rules set and Valerie gone, Maple Crest entered what people later called its calm era. Lawns looked a little wilder. People waved without suspicion. Dogs barked freely without the threat of noise citations. The air felt lighter. One Saturday morning, I was repairing a split board on my fence when Tony jogged up, out of breath but excited. "Ethan, big update." I braced myself. "If this is another HOA rumor, I'm not biting." "It's not a rumor," he said, waving his phone. "Look." He handed it to me. The headline on the screen read, "Local HOA President Pleads Guilty to Unauthorized Transmission Network." Underneath was a photo of Valerie in court, looking like someone who had finally realized her clipboard couldn't protect her from federal statutes. "Well," I said, "she lasted longer than I expected." Tony winced. "She's looking at a lot of charges, man." I handed his phone back. "She dug her own trench, then climbed into it." He chuckled. "Hey, by the way, you and Mrs. Doran, total legends. Someone on Reddit said you should get medals." I groaned. "Please tell me you didn't post this whole saga online?" Tony grinned. "Dude, I run a channel. This has been my best performing content all year. I should have expected that. In the age of the internet, no HOA drama goes unshared." Later that day, Mrs. Agatha Doran shuffled onto my porch, carrying a tin of cookies, actual cookies this time. "Heard from a little bird that Valerie's plea deal went public," she said, settling into my rocking chair. "Justice moves slowly, but it eventually arrives. You think she'll serve time?" "Oh, undoubtedly." Agatha took a bite of a cookie. "Illegal transmissions, failure to report imports, unauthorized encryption equipment." She waved her hand. "The government hates competition." We talked for a while about normal things, gardening, weather patterns, cats, the unreliable nature of teenagers. But eventually, as always, the conversation drifted back to the trail. "You protected something important," she said softly. "Not just land, legacy." I nodded. "She almost ruined it. If you hadn't helped." She cut me off with a chuckle. "Please, I've been bored since '92. This was refreshing." We spent the afternoon in companionable silence, watching sunlight flicker through the pines. A gentle breeze carried the smell of earth and history. Then Hank wandered up the path with 2 beers. "Trail, walk?" he asked. "Always," I said. We strolled the length of the trail, kicking up leaves, listening to the birds, and admiring the deep grooves where Valerie's tires had once met their match. Some marks fade, others become part of the story. About halfway down, we passed the exact spot where her SUV had blown its tires. Hank paused, nudging the dirt with his boot. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "What? The spike strip?" "Yeah," I smiled. "Not for a second." He laughed. "Good, because that was the single greatest thing I've ever seen." We reached the end of the trail, where the forest opened into a small clearing drenched in late afternoon sunlight. I stood there a moment, feeling rooted like my boots were tied directly to the land beneath me. "So it's over," Hank said. "The war, yep," I replied. "Peace at last." But as every landowner knows, peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the earned right to enjoy your land without interference. A week later, the county mailed me the official certificate, declaring the trail protected. I framed that document in reclaimed lumber from my father's old barn and hung it above the fireplace. It looked right at home. Life moved on. Maple Crest healed. People became friendlier. The forest grew quieter. And me, I returned to my routines: morning coffee, evening strolls, weekend hunts, Sunday lemon bars with Agatha. One quiet evening, as I sat on the porch watching shadows stretch across the trail, I realized something. Valerie's downfall wasn't really about the spike strip, or the cameras, or even the illegal shack. It happened because she underestimated the one thing no HOA can ever override: a man's bond with the land he belongs to. And that land, my land, won the war long before any projector lit up a community center wall. When everything finally settled, I'd sit on my porch at dusk and watch the sun fall behind the ridge, the trail glowing gold like it was thanking me for fighting for it. Life felt quieter again, honest, simple, the way it was meant to be. And sometimes, on the good evenings, when the breeze was soft and the pines whispered just right, I'd think about how close Valerie came to taking all of this away. Not the land itself, but the feeling of belonging to it. She thought power came from rules and clipboards, but real power comes from knowing who you are, standing your ground, and refusing to bend when someone tries to rewrite the story of your life. In the end, the trail remained mine, the land remained free, and peace returned, not because of revenge or force, but because truth showed up at the right time with the right people behind it. Protect what matters even when others don't understand why it matters to you. Stand firm, stand honest, and stand with those who stand with you. Because land can be inherited, but courage must be chosen. If you've ever dealt with a wild HOA or fought for something you love, tell me your story in the comments. And if you want more battles, more twists, and more victories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.